Chapter 1. The Shaman's Vision. The night was thick, alive with shadows that slithered and danced like spirits over the twisted trees of our encampment. My brayherd lay scattered across the glade, resting among the gnarled roots and damp earth, their forms hunched, feral and expectant. In the center of it all, I stood alone, my breath coming in huffs, nostrils flared as I prepared for the ritual, the power of chaos stirring within me like a smoldering fire waiting to erupt. I raised my hands, claws curling as I began to chant, my voice a low growl that rose into a feverish pitch. The words spilled from my lips, ancient and raw, a language known only to those who walked in the dark places, those who knew the old gods' wrath and their dark promises. Shadows gathered around me, drawn to the sound, twisting and writhing as though pulled by an unseen force. I could feel their hunger, their desire to taste blood and hear the screams of the fallen. As the chant grew louder, the world around me seemed to darken, the trees leaning in as if to listen, their branches reaching down, twisted and eager. My herd stirred, their eyes glinting in the shadows, heads lifted as the power of chaos pulsed through the glade. And then, in a moment of sudden silence, I felt it, a presence vast and overwhelming, that settled over me like a shroud. My vision darkened, and I was no longer in the glade. Instead, I found myself standing at the edge of a great forest, its trees looming like silent sentinels, ancient and powerful. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, figures that shifted and blurred, creatures both familiar and strange, ethereal beings that watched me with cold, unblinking eyes. I knew where I stood, Athel Loren, the realm of the wood elves, a place of magic and secrets, a place forbidden to my kind. And yet, as I looked upon it, I felt no fear, only hunger, a deep, gnawing need that burned within me like fire. The chaos gods had brought me here, had shown me this place, and I knew what they wanted. They wanted the forest tainted, its ancient magic corrupted, its spirit broken. A vision unfolded before me, twisted and glorious, the trees blackened and twisted, their leaves withering beneath the touch of chaos, the wood elves fleeing, their blood soaking into the sacred earth, feeding the dark power that would take root here. The god's voice whispered to me, urging me forward, promising power beyond anything I had known. I would lead my brayherd into Athel Loren, would carve a path of ruin through the heart of their ancient woods, and in doing so, I would rise, my name spoken in reverence and fear among my kin. Power. Glory. These were the gifts the gods offered, and I would claim them. The vision faded, leaving me once again in the glade, my heart pounding, my body trembling with the weight of what I had seen. I looked around at my herd, their eyes on me, expectant, waiting. They had heard my chant, had felt the stir of dark power in the air, and they knew that something was coming. They knew that I had seen the will of the gods. With a snarl, I raised my staff, slamming it into the ground, and let out a guttural roar, a sound that echoed through the trees, fierce and wild. My brayherd answered, their voices rising in a cacophony of brays and growls, a savage chorus that reverberated through the glade. They were ready, their blood boiling, their hearts filled with the same dark desire that burned within me. The gods have shown me the path, I shouted, my voice a snarl, filled with the fevered fervor of the vision. Athel Loren lies before us, ripe for the taking. Its power, its magic, it belongs to us. The gods have promised us glory, promised us strength, if we bring ruin to that cursed forest. The brayherd brayed louder, their cries filled with eagerness, with bloodlust. I could see the fire in their eyes, the hunger that matched my own. They would follow me into Athel Loren, would fight and die for the promise of chaos, for the chance to spill the blood of the hated wood elves and taint their precious forest. I moved through the crowd, touching each beastman with my staff, marking them with the power of chaos, binding them to the god's will. They bared their teeth, their eyes glazed with devotion, their bodies trembling as the dark energy pulsed through them, strengthening them, filling them with the unholy might they would need for the battles to come. I returned to the center of the glade, Raising my staff once more, the symbols carved into its wood glowing faintly, pulsing with the life of chaos itself. "Tomorrow we march," I roared, my voice a promise, a command. "Tomorrow we bring ruin to Athel Loren. We will break its spirit, corrupt its magic, and claim its power for the gods." The brayherd erupted in a frenzy, their howls and roars filling the night, shaking the very earth beneath us. They were ready, filled with the fire of chaos, their minds and bodies prepared for the carnage that lay ahead. And I felt the gods' favor upon me, a dark blessing that filled me with strength, with certainty. Athel Loren would fall, its magic would wither, its guardians would die, and the forest would be ours. Chapter 2. Into the Woods. The edge of Athel Loren rose before us, a wall of dark trees that stretched high into the sky, their branches twisting together like fingers woven into a trap. The air here was thick with something ancient, something alive that seemed to breathe in the shadows, watching us with a silent malice. I could feel it, this hidden power, woven into the very soil, into the roots that burrowed deep beneath our feet. This was no ordinary forest. It was a place where the land itself was a creature, an ancient beast lying in wait. But I was not here to be cowed by enchanted trees and lingering shadows. I raised my staff high, the chaos symbols etched into it glinting in the dim light, and turned to my brayherd, their eyes wide, their breaths coming fast with anticipation and unease. "The gods have led us here," I bellowed, my voice a challenge to the trees themselves. "This forest may be cursed, but it cannot withstand the will of chaos. We are here to claim it, to bring ruin to its depths." The brayherd let out a collective bray, their cries fierce, yet I could feel the tension rippling through them, the uncertainty that lingered in their gaze. They sensed it too, the power that lay hidden within the forest, a magic that was unlike any we had faced before. But I would not allow hesitation to poison their resolve. Athel Loren would fall, and I would be the one to bring it to its knees. We marched forward, our hooves breaking the soft soil as we pushed into the forest's edge. Almost immediately, the air grew colder, thick with mist that seemed to coil around us, softening the sounds of our movement, smothering our cries. The trees grew thicker, their branches stretching low, crowding together as though to block our way. I could feel the forest resisting, its ancient spirit stirring, aware of our intrusion. One of my brayherds stumbled, a low growl rumbling in his throat as a root twisted around his leg, pulling him to the ground. He snarled, yanking himself free, and I could see the faint shimmer of magic clinging to the root, an energy that faded as he kicked it aside. The forest was alive, and it would not let us pass easily. "Do not fear this place," I shouted, lifting my staff as I began to chant, calling upon the gods, drawing their power into me. The symbols on my staff glowed brighter, pulsing with the rhythm of my words, and I could feel the forest's resistance buckle, the ancient magic recoiling from the chaos energy that surged through me. I pushed forward, feeling the power ripple outwards, forcing the trees to bend, the roots to loosen their grip. The forest will bow to chaos, as all things must. The brayherd grunted and brayed in approval, bolstered by my display, their fear pushed aside by the thrill of dark magic. They followed me, each one stepping with renewed ferocity, tearing through the thick undergrowth, their axes hacking at branches that seemed to twist and reach toward us like claws. But for every branch we broke, for every root we severed, the forest seemed to shift around us, the trees closing in, the paths twisting, winding into themselves as though we were caught in the belly of some great beast. It was as if the forest itself was alive, adapting, changing with each step we took, trying to trap us within its depths. I could feel my followers' unease growing again, murmurs rippling through the herd as the forest thickened, darker and more oppressive with every step. Shadows clung to the trees, flickering in shapes that seemed to move just beyond sight, shifting and changing as though watching us with unseen eyes. The brayherd's footsteps faltered, their eyes darting nervously, and I knew I had to keep them focused, to remind them of the power they served. Raising my staff, I called upon the gods once more, feeling their dark energy surge into me, wrapping around me like a cloak. I muttered words of chaos, words that made the trees shiver, The shadows pull back, retreating from the power of the gods. The gods have brought us here, and they will see us through. I growled, the words filled with defiance, my gaze burning with the certainty of chaos. The magic of this place is strong, but it is weak against the power of chaos. At my words, the brayherd rallied, their snarls filling the air as they tore through the forest, hacking at branches, trampling roots, their fear replaced by a wild, reckless rage. They would follow me, I knew, would charge into the heart of this cursed forest, trusting in my power, trusting that chaos would shield us. But even as I led them deeper, a flicker of doubt gnawed at me. The forest was unlike any place I had entered before. Its power was not the raw, unbridled might of chaos, but something more ancient, something woven into the very essence of this place. Athel Loren was no passive land, it was a force unto itself, a guardian of its own secrets, a power that defied my control. We pushed forward, but I could feel the forest pushing back, a steady resistance that pulsed with every step we took, a subtle defiance that mocked my magic. And as we broke through another thicket, a new sight greeted us. Figures made of bark and vine, their forms twisted and gnarled, eyes like hollow pits staring at us with cold, unyielding hatred. The forest spirits. The brayherd snarled and brayed, brandishing their weapons, but I knew that brute force would not be enough. I raised my staff, channeling the chaos energy, letting it flow through me, out into the forest, forcing back the spirits, the shadows, the trees themselves. The forest shivered beneath my power, but it was not enough to banish the spirits. They resisted, their forms bending but never breaking, pushing back against the force of chaos. "Stand firm," I bellowed, my voice a snarl, filled with the fury of a shaman whose will would not be denied. The gods are with us. No forest spirit, no ancient magic can withstand the will of chaos. The brayherd surged forward, crashing into the forest spirits, hacking and snarling, our blood mixing with the strange, sap-like ichor of the spirits. The battle was fierce, brutal, each spirit falling only to rise again, as though the forest itself were fighting through them, as though Athel Loren itself was unwilling to yield. But I would not turn back. The gods had promised me glory, power beyond anything this cursed place could comprehend. And as I led my herd deeper, pushing through the forest's defiance, I knew that Athel Loren would fall, and that the power of chaos would taint its heart. Yet somewhere deep within, beneath my fury, I felt a strange unease, a sense that we had only just begun to glimpse the true might of this place. But I silenced the thought, pushing it aside. The gods were with me, and no forest, no magic would stand in my way. Chapter 3. The First Skirmish. The silence was a weapon in Athel Loren. I could feel it settle around us as we moved deeper into the forest, the shadows thickening, the trees twisting, and that cursed stillness pressing in on every side. My brayherd followed closely, their braying quieter now, the tension rolling through them like a tide. The air was laced with something I could not see but could feel. A predator's patience, a presence that lingered just beyond sight, watching, waiting. I raised my staff, growling low to keep them moving. These woods had already tried to stop us, their branches reaching like claws, their roots tangling and twisting in our path. But we had pushed through, our path carved with axes and the power of chaos. Nothing would hold us back. The gods had chosen me to break this place, to taint its heart, and I would do so with their strength. Then it happened. A flash in the trees, silent and swift, a gleam of something sharp moving through the shadows. Before I could react, one of my brayherd cried out, his body jolting as an arrow struck deep into his chest, piercing fur and flesh. He collapsed, his life spilling out onto the forest floor in a silent, final gasp. The brayherd faltered, their eyes wide, panic flashing in them as they scanned the shadows. And then another arrow, then another, each one finding its mark with merciless precision. The forest had erupted around us, and yet there was no sound, no war cry, only the quiet hiss of arrows flying through the leaves, burying themselves into my herd. "Show yourselves," I roared, raising my staff high, fury igniting within me. "Cowards, come fight in the open, where the gods can see your blood spill." But the forest offered no answer. Only more arrows, more shadows flitting between trees, figures that moved like ghosts, disappearing before I could catch sight of them. My brayherd brayed in confusion, some of them charging blindly into the trees, swinging their weapons at shadows, striking nothing but air. One by one, more of my herd fell, each death a silent insult, a cut to my pride. These were no mere warriors. These were the wood elves, guardians of Athel Loren, but to me they were only pests, obstacles sent to test my strength, to prove my worth to the gods. I growled, my anger boiling over as I gripped my staff tighter, drawing upon the dark magic that swirled within me. "Enough of this," I bellowed, channeling chaos into my voice, letting the forest feel the weight of my wrath. I slammed my staff into the ground, sending a ripple of dark energy surging outwards, the air humming with power. The shadows flickered, the leaves rustling as my magic pulsed through the trees, forcing back the silence, calling out to my enemies. And for a moment, it worked. I saw them, figures in the branches, lithe and silent, their eyes cold, their forms blending with the leaves as though they were part of the forest itself. Way-watchers. Their bows gleamed in the faint light, each arrow held with a deadly calm, each archer's gaze fixed upon us with a detachment that only enraged me further. They fired again, but this time I was ready. I thrust my staff forward, summoning a wall of dark energy, deflecting some of their arrows, forcing the Way-watchers to shift, to move. They were quick, slipping from branch to branch, but I could feel them tiring, could sense the effort it took to keep this game of shadows. "Strike now," I roared to my brayherd, waving my staff forward. "Show them the wrath of chaos. Tear down their precious trees if you must." My herd, roused by my command, surged forward, their fear replaced by the hunger to kill, to rend flesh and break bone. They swung their axes, hacking at the trees, crashing through the underbrush in a frenzy, snarling and braying as they charged. The Way-watchers moved, retreating deeper into the forest, slipping further into shadow, but my herd pursued them, their eyes alight with fury, their weapons raised. Yet the forest itself seemed to close ranks against us, roots tangling, branches lowering to block our path, and the Way-watchers took full advantage, leading my herd deeper, drawing them in, each step turning the forest against us, the elves appearing and disappearing, striking from every side, leaving nothing but blood and silence in their wake. One of my brayherd fell beside me, his throat pierced, his blood spraying across the leaves, his eyes wide with shock and rage. My own blood burned, my fists clenched around my staff. These elves would not win. They were not warriors, they were shadows, cowards hiding in their precious woods. I had seen true battles, had fought face to face with foes who did not flinch from death. These elves, with their silent arrows and ghostly movements, disgusted me. "Face me," I snarled, my voice cutting through the chaos, my anger searing like fire. "If you are warriors, then fight like warriors. Face chaos's men, not phantoms." But still, they answered with silence, with arrows and shadows, each one a whisper of death, a reminder that they were in their own domain, their own enchanted kingdom. And we, no matter how fierce, were intruders. I watched as more of my brayherd fell, their cries fading into the dark, the life leaving them with each arrow, each unseen blade. My fury deepened, hardening into something darker, something colder. The gods had chosen me, had sent me to claim this forest, to break it open and taint it with their power. But Athel Loren was no mere wood. It was a force, a being that lived and breathed with the very magic I had come to destroy. The Way-watchers continued their assault, yet I felt something shift within me. The rage was still there, burning hot, but beneath it, a seed of understanding took root. The elves had shown me their strength, their mastery over this place. They were not to be taken lightly, not as mere prey or obstacles. They were predators in their own right, guardians with a cunning that mirrored my own, and they would not yield easily. "Fall back," I shouted, pulling my brayherd together, rallying them as we retreated from the trees, their branches reaching to pull us back, as if they, too, thirsted for our blood. My herd staggered, bloodied and weary, but they obeyed, their eyes flickering with the fear and anger that gripped us all. We regrouped, away from the shadows, away from the reach of their arrows. I looked over my brayherd, their faces scarred and weary, their bodies bruised and bloodied. We had taken our first true losses in Athel Loren, and I could see the doubt flickering in their eyes, the fear that the forest was beyond our reach, that we could not break it. But I would not allow defeat to take hold. I turned to my herd, my voice a snarl, fierce and unyielding. "These elves are nothing," I spat, letting my anger fuel them. "They hide in their trees, but they are weak, afraid to face us. We are the chosen of chaos, and nothing, no man, no tree, no spirit will stand in our way." The brayherd brayed in response, their voices tinged with defiance, the fear fading, replaced by a determination as dark as my own. I could still feel the weight of the losses we had taken, the lives the forest had claimed, but it only strengthened my resolve. The gods had chosen me to break this forest, and break it I would. Chapter 4. The Spirit of the Forest. The forest thickened around us as we pushed forward, each step heavier, each breath more labored. Athel Loren was changing, its shadows deepening, its trees growing closer, the air itself thick with a magic that made my skin prickle. I could feel the forest resisting us, but my rage had only sharpened, my resolve unbreakable. The gods had sent me to taint this place, to drag it down into darkness, and I would not be denied. Then the forest began to move. It started with a low creak, the sound of branches bending, roots pulling free from the ground. At first I thought it was another trick of the forest, more illusions to sow doubt and fear. But then I saw them, figures emerging from the trees themselves, their bodies twisting with bark and vine, their faces hollow and ancient, filled with an anger that had simmered for centuries. Dryads. The brayherd hesitated, their eyes widening as they took in the sight. These creatures were no ordinary foes, no mere defenders of this place. They were the forest made flesh, spirits born from its magic, protectors bound to the will of Athel Loren. They watched us with cold, unfeeling gazes, and in that moment I felt the weight of their hatred, an ancient fury that was as much a part of this forest as its trees and roots. One of my beastmen charged forward, letting out a defiant bray as he raised his axe. But before he could strike, a dryad's limb lashed out, faster than I could blink, its arm extending like a whip, wrapping around his neck. In one swift movement it pulled him forward, and I watched as the life drained from his eyes, his body going limp, before being cast aside, like nothing more than broken kindling. The dryads moved in unison, their bodies twisting and shifting, branches extending, vines snaking around us, roots clawing up from the ground to entangle the brayherd. My beastmen swung their weapons, braying in rage and fear, hacking at the wooden limbs that lashed at them. But for every dryad felled, another took its place, as if the forest itself was creating them, willing them into existence. I felt my rage rise, the pulse of chaos burning within me. I would not be thwarted by these wooden wretches. Raising my staff, I began to chant, calling upon the gods, drawing forth their power, letting the dark energy coil around me. The symbols on my staff flared with light, a sickly green glow that pulsed with the rhythm of my words, and I thrust it forward, sending a wave of chaos surging into the forest. The dryads recoiled, their limbs twisting, their hollow faces contorted in silent screams as the dark energy struck them. Some fell, their forms splintering and shattering, but the forest's resistance did not waver. More dryads rose, their numbers endless, the ground trembling as larger figures emerged. Treeman, ancient beings of bark and rearroot, towering over us, their faces carved with wrath. The brayherd faltered, their courage flickering as they took in the sight. But I refused to retreat. I snarled, gripping my staff tighter, forcing the chaos energy to burn brighter, stronger. I would bend this place to my will, tear apart the magic that defied me, make it bow to the gods as all things must. Feel the power of chaos, I roared, pushing the energy forward, feeling it clash against the natural magic of Athel Loren. The forest shuddered, resisting, its power like a wall that pressed back against me, an ancient strength that defied my will. The treemen advanced, their movements slow but relentless, their eyes fixed upon me, as though they could sense that I was the one leading this defilement, that I was the threat they must eradicate. One of the treemen swung its massive arm, and I barely managed to leap back, the ground shaking as its limb crashed down, scattering dirt and roots. I thrust my staff forward, summoning a blast of dark energy, striking the creature's bark, but the magic barely seemed to affect it. The treeman's eyes glowed with a power older than I could comprehend, a force that had thrived here long before chaos touched this land. The gods had promised me power, had assured me that I would break this forest, and yet the magic of Athel Loren was stronger than I had anticipated. It resisted my chaos, its energy thick and ancient, pulsing through every root, every leaf, as if the forest itself was a living, breathing creature. And for the first time I felt a flicker of doubt, a sense that perhaps this place was more than I could conquer alone. But I would not yield. I could not. The gods had chosen me, given me their strength, their blessing. I was Ghorlak, shaman of chaos, and I would bring ruin to this cursed forest if it meant tearing the very soul from it. Fight on, I snarled to my brayherd, forcing the doubt from my mind, steeling myself with fury. These creatures are nothing. They cannot stand against the power of the gods. But even as I spoke, I could feel the toll of the battle. The forest was draining us, sapping our strength with each step, each swing, each spell cast. My beastmen were tiring, their bodies bruised and bleeding, their eyes clouded with a fear they could not mask. The treemen loomed over us, their arms swinging like clubs, scattering my brayherd, sending them crashing into trees, the ground littered with the bodies of those who had fallen. I raised my staff again, pouring my last reserves of magic into a single, focused blast, the dark energy coiling forward, slamming into one of the treemen. The creature staggered, its bark splintering, a hollow groan echoing from within its form. But even as it fell, another took its place, stepping forward with a relentless fury, its limbs twisting and reaching, its eyes filled with a hate as old as the forest itself. And then I understood. Athel Loren was not merely resisting me, it was fighting back, its magic woven into every branch, every root, every creature that walked its paths. This was a place of power that even chaos struggled to consume, a force that defied the gods' will. But rather than despair, I felt a thrill, a fierce hunger ignited within me. This was a power worth claiming, a force that could strengthen me beyond anything the gods had yet granted. I would break Athel Loren, not simply to taint it, but to consume it, to make its magic mine, bending it to chaos and claiming it as my own. I bared my teeth, my voice rising into a snarl. You think you can defy the will of chaos? I spat at the forest, my voice filled with dark promise. I will bring ruin to every tree, every creature that dares resist. This power will be mine, and I will not stop until Athel Loren itself lies broken. My brayherd, their spirits renewed by my defiance, surged forward, their cries rising into a savage chorus, their axes swinging, their bodies crashing into the forest spirits with renewed fervor. I watched as the treemen swung back, as the dryads closed ranks, the battle raging around me, the air thick with the scent of blood and bark, of chaos and magic, of a clash that would not end until one force lay defeated. Athel Loren had shown me its strength. Now I would show it mine. Chapter 5. The Wood Elf Host. The air was thick with the scent of bark and blood, a mingling of forest magic, and the tang of death that clung to us as we carved our way deeper into Athel Loren. My brayherd was restless, their eyes wild, their bodies marked with the scars of the battles we had fought against this cursed forest. We had encountered tree spirits, fought against roots and shadows, but none of it had shaken me. Each battle had only stoked the fires of my resolve. Today, however, I sensed a new threat, a presence in the forest that pulsed with an intensity that made the air hum. The silence of the woods felt heavier, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting. I knew then that we were not alone, that the forest had called its defenders to face us, and that Athel Loren was preparing for war. My lips curled into a snarl as I looked around at the gathered brayherd, their bodies tensed, their weapons gripped tightly, each of them casting wary glances at the trees. They had felt it too, the shift in the air, the sense of eyes upon them, of the forest ready to strike. Fear glimmered in their gaze, but I would not allow it to take root. "Listen to me," I growled, raising my staff, the chaos symbols etched into its wood glowing with a sickly light. The brayherd's attention snapped to me, their faces reflecting both fear and reverence. "The forest has called forth its guardians, yes. It brings us its strongest warriors, its most ancient protectors. But do you know what that means?" I paused, letting my words sink in, letting them feel the weight of my gaze. "It means they fear us. They fear what we bring. The gods have sent us to shatter this place, to bring chaos to every root and leaf, and the forest knows it. Athel Loren trembles before us." The brayherd roared in answer, their voices a wild cacophony of brays and growls, fists pounding on chests, weapons clashing together. I could see their fear fading, replaced by a savage hunger, a thirst for the blood of those who dared to stand against the will of chaos. "Today we prove ourselves," I bellowed, my voice rising over the din. "The gods have blessed us with this chance, with this battle. When we spill the blood of these forest dwellers, when we leave their bones scattered beneath the trees, the gods themselves will look upon us and know our strength." The brayherd's roars grew louder, a chorus of fury and devotion, the sound reverberating through the trees, as though even the forest itself could feel the weight of our intentions. I felt the chaos energy surging through me, filling me with a sense of purpose, a certainty that we would conquer, that no elf or spirit could deny us. And then, from the shadows of the forest, they appeared. They moved like shadows themselves, their forms blending with the trees, silent and graceful. The glade guard came first, their bows raised, their eyes hard and cold, each movement a testament to their bond with this place. They stood as still as the trees around them. Their arrows nocked, aimed with a calm, deadly precision that spoke of years, perhaps centuries, of training. Behind them, the eternal guard stepped forward, their gleaming armor woven with vines, their weapons shimmering with an unnatural light. They were warriors of Athel Loren, bound not by the thirst for blood or the promises of chaos, but by a loyalty as ancient as the forest itself. And I could see it in their faces, that same intensity, that same resolve that pulsed through the trees. They were ready to kill us, to drive us back, to protect the heart of their forest at any cost. But I would not be intimidated. These elves were nothing more than another test, another obstacle that the gods had placed before me, a chance to prove that my will, my strength, was worthy of their favor. "Forward!" I roared, thrusting my staff toward the elven host, my eyes blazing with the fire of chaos. "Show them no mercy, for the gods, for chaos." The brayherd charged, their bodies crashing through the underbrush, weapons raised, voices raised in a wild, guttural chant. They lunged toward the elves with reckless abandon, a wall of fur and muscle and steel, a force that had shattered countless villages, spilled the blood of man and beast alike. But these elves, they did not flinch. The glade guard let loose their arrows, each one finding its mark with eerie precision. My beastmen fell mid-charge, their bodies crumpling as arrows pierced through fur and flesh, eyes wide in shock as they slumped to the ground. But still, the brayherd pushed forward, unfazed by the fallen, driven by the fire I had lit within them. The eternal guard met our charge with stoic calm, their spears striking out like lightning, their shields raised in perfect formation. They held their line, unmoved by the savage force of my brayherd, each movement practiced, each blow struck with deadly precision. I watched as beastman after beastman fell before them, my warriors struggling to break through their defenses, their ferocity clashing against the unyielding discipline of the elves. I snarled, gripping my staff tighter, feeling the pulse of chaos within me. urging me to act, to join the fray. Raising my staff, I began to chant, my voice a low growl, filled with the dark words that summoned the gods' power. The symbols on my staff glowed, pulsing with energy, and I directed it toward the elves, sending a wave of dark energy surging into their ranks. The glade guards staggered, their formation faltering as the dark energy swept through them, twisting the light around them, bending it to chaos. Some fell, clutching their heads as the magic took hold, their bodies convulsing before they slumped to the ground, lifeless. But still, the Eternal Guard pressed on, their eyes hardening as they saw their kin fall, their resolve only deepening. I could see the anger in their faces, a fury that burned as bright as my own, a determination that matched the fire of chaos. They would not yield, would not break, not while the heart of their forest still beat. The brayherd surged again, pushing against the elven line, each step a struggle, each blow a test of will. The elves fought with a grace and a precision that defied our savagery, their movements a dance, their weapons extensions of the forest itself. And as I watched, I felt a grudging respect, a dark admiration for their strength, their unity. But respect was not enough to save them. I raised my staff higher, channeling more of the gods' power, feeling the dark energy coil around me like a serpent, filling me with a sense of invincibility. I would shatter their line, would tear through their defenses, would make them bow to the will of chaos. But as I unleashed the energy, the forest pushed back, its magic rising in answer, the air thickening with a force that pressed down upon me, a resistance that defied my will. Athel Loren was alive, fighting with its own strength, its own will, and I could feel it challenging me, mocking me. A battle of flesh, steel, and magic unfolded around me, and as I watched the forest and its guardians resist, as I saw the elves refuse to bend, a dark determination hardened within me. The gods had promised me glory, had promised that I would taint this place with chaos, and I would, even if it cost every drop of blood, every last breath of my brayherd. I would bring ruin to this forest. The elves would fall, the trees would burn, and Athel Loren would remember the name of Ghorlak. Chapter 6. Battle in the Heart of the Forest. The heart of Athel Loren lay before us, pulsing with an energy that seemed almost alive, a presence that seeped from every tree, every root, every shadow. The air was thick, charged with a magic that gnawed at the edges of my mind, filling the brayherd with an unease they could not shake. But I felt only fury. The gods had led me here to claim this forest, to drag it down into chaos, and no cursed magic would stop me. As we pressed forward, a whisper swept through the trees, a sound like leaves rustling, like shadows breathing. I recognized it at once. It was not just the forest, but the elves moving through the trees, preparing for their assault. These guardians would not let us tread further without a fight, and I welcomed it. I raised my staff high, the symbols of chaos glowing in the dim light, casting twisted shadows across the ground. "Hold strong, brayherd," I snarled, my voice echoing in the silence. "The forest may resist, but chaos is with us. We will show these wretched trees and their keepers the true power of the gods." The brayherd let out a ragged cheer, their weapons raised, eyes alight with bloodlust. But as we stepped deeper, the forest closed in, the trees twisting into shapes that were not natural, their branches lowering to block our path, roots thickening to snare our feet. It was as if the forest itself was moving, adapting to repel us, bending its will against the dark power I wielded. The attack came without warning. Arrows hissed from the shadows, striking down several of my herd before we even saw where they came from. The glade guard emerged from behind the trees, loosing arrows with deadly precision, their forms half hidden, their movements as fluid as the shadows themselves. My beastmen howled, charging at them, weapons raised, but the elves melted back into the forest, leaving only silence in their wake. And then they came from the other side. The Eternal Guard, their eyes cold and unyielding, stepped from behind the twisted trunks, their weapons glinting with a faint green light, as if infused with the very essence of the forest. They met the brayherd's charge with shields raised, spears extended, each movement precise, each strike deadly. My warriors brayed and snarled, swinging their axes wildly, but they clashed against an unbreakable line, their strength splintering against the discipline of the elves. Frustration boiled within me. The elves were using the forest itself to strike from the shadows, to confound us, to make us bleed. I would not let them turn the trees into weapons against us. I began to chant, my voice a low growl that built into a snarl, calling forth the dark energy that thrummed within me. The chaos symbols on my staff glowed brighter, the air around me thickening with the power I summoned. I thrust my staff forward, releasing a wave of dark energy that blasted through the trees, striking at the figures hidden within the shadows. The magic rippled out, tearing through roots and branches, forcing the forest to recoil. For a moment, the elves hesitated, their line faltering as the force of chaos surged through them. Forward, I roared, urging my brayherd to press the advantage, to strike while the elves were thrown off balance. My beastmen let out a bloodthirsty bray and charged, their weapons flashing in the dim light, their eyes wild with the thrill of bloodshed. But the forest answered back. As my magic spread, the trees twisted again, but this time not to defend. The very ground beneath us began to move, roots surging up like living snakes, wrapping around the legs of my warriors, dragging them down, tearing at their flesh. The forest was no longer merely an obstacle. It was a weapon, wielded by the elves, infused with a life and fury that I had underestimated. I summoned more dark energy, slamming my staff into the ground, sending another blast through the forest, fighting against the relentless grip of Athel Loren. But each time my magic surged, the forest seemed to absorb it, bending but never breaking, as if the power here was bound to the land itself, woven into every tree, every root, every blade of grass. The brayherd was struggling, their savage strength faltering as the elves surrounded them, their attacks swift, precise, each strike coordinated, each movement calculated. The wood elves fought with a unity that was foreign to my kind, their discipline an unyielding wall that absorbed the brayherd's ferocity and broke it down with deadly efficiency. I could see the fear beginning to take hold of my warriors, their movements slowing, their eyes darting, looking to me for guidance, for strength. My grip on them was slipping, the power I wielded failing to turn the tide as I had promised. I felt the sting of doubt from their gazes, a questioning that burned me to the core. With a snarl, I raised my staff again, drawing forth every last bit of chaos energy within me, channeling it into a single, searing blast. The ground trembled as the dark energy surged forward, blackening roots, shattering branches, sending a wave of corruption through the forest. The elves staggered, their line faltering as the chaos energy swept through them, forcing them back. "See!" I roared, my voice hoarse, my body trembling from the strain of holding the magic. "Chaos cannot be defied. Not by these trees, not by these elves." The brayherd, spurred by my display of power, let out a renewed cry, charging forward, swinging their axes with reckless fury. They crashed into the elven line, forcing the glade guard and eternal guard back, gaining ground with each bloody step. But the victory was fleeting. The ground shuddered, and a new wave of forest spirits emerged, dryads twisting up from the roots, their faces hollow and filled with a wrath that chilled even me. They threw themselves at my brayherd, their limbs extending like spears, their bodies shifting and twisting, blending with the trees, striking down my warriors with merciless precision. The brayherd wavered, their cries growing frantic as they realized the true extent of the forest's power, the unbreakable bond that tied these spirits to the very land we sought to conquer. They looked to me, their eyes filled with fear, and I could feel the weight of their doubt pressing down, their faith in me cracking. "Stand your ground," I bellowed, but my voice was strained, my own strength beginning to wane. I felt the exhaustion gnawing at me, the endless pulse of Athel Loren's power resisting my every spell, my every effort. The forest was more than I had anticipated, more than even chaos had prepared me for. As I fought, as I called upon the gods to bolster my power, to break the hold this place had on my brayherd, a grim realization settled over me. The forest was not merely a battleground, it was a living force, one that could not be simply bent to my will. Athel Loren was not merely a place, it was a being, a creature of magic and wrath, ancient and dying. My grip on the brayherd was slipping, their confidence in me weakening with each life lost, each attack repelled. They looked to me, doubt etched into their eyes, doubt that cut deeper than any blade, doubt that threatened to sever my hold on them entirely. But I would not yield. Not now. Not ever. I snarled, raising my staff one final time, drawing on every last reserve of strength, the fire of chaos flickering within me like a dying flame. I would not let this forest, these cursed elves, see me fall. The gods had chosen me, and I would either claim this land or die with it. And as the battle raged around me, as the forest closed in and my brayherd began to falter, I knew that whatever happened, Athel Loren would remember my name. Chapter 7. The Wrath of the Forest Lords. The forest pressed in on us from every side, roots writhing beneath our feet like snakes, branches reaching down to tear at flesh and armor. My brayherd was scattered, their confidence shattered, their eyes filled with fear. They had come here driven by bloodlust and my promises of chaos, yet now I could see that faith crumbling under the weight of Athel Loren's relentless resistance. We were losing, and I would not allow that. I retreated to a small clearing, raising my staff high, feeling the pull of chaos surge through me, desperate in me. I would summon a creature, something that would turn the tide. A beast so steeped in darkness that even this cursed forest would tremble before it. I closed my eyes, muttering the words of power, feeling the energy coil around me, thickening, tightening, growing into a vortex of malevolent strength. Dark gods, I growled, voice trembling with fervor, grant me a beast of your making. Let it tear this forest asunder. Let it devour these spirits. Let it be a force of chaos that will leave Athel Loren in ruins. The ground trembled as my chant deepened, my words becoming guttural and wild. I could feel the rift opening, the gateway to chaos, a tier in reality that would allow a creature from the darkest depths to step forth. The air grew colder, thick with a presence that coiled through my bones, and I felt a thrill of triumph. This would be the weapon that would break the forest. But something was wrong. The energy shifted, spiraling out of my control, twisting against me. My chanting faltered as I felt the pull of something older, something that did not belong to chaos but to the forest itself. I struggled to hold the power, to contain it, but it slipped through my grasp, redirecting, bending toward a force I could not name, could not comprehend. And then he emerged. From the shadows beyond the clearing, an enormous shape stepped forward, each movement slow, deliberate, heavy with purpose. He was taller than any treeman I had ever seen, his bark dark as the depths of the earth, his eyes burning with a fierce green light. Ancient symbols were carved into his bark, symbols that pulsed with a pulsat as old as the forest itself. This was no mere treeman. This was Durthu, the Elder, the wrath of Athel Loren given form. My blood chilled. Durthu's gaze swept over my brayherd, a gaze filled with cold fury, with an anger that went beyond mere vengeance. He had seen centuries, perhaps millennia, of trespassers, of invaders, and I knew in that moment that he considered me no different than all who had come before. But there was something worse in his gaze, something that told me he saw me as a threat to be eradicated, nothing more. My brayherd hesitated, their weapons lowered, their bodies trembling as they took in the sight of the forest lord. Even the most savage among them fell silent, fear coursing through them as Durthu took another step forward, each movement like the rumbling of an earthquake. I tried to rally them, raising my staff high, forcing my voice to remain steady. Do not falter, I snarled, though even I could feel the tremor in my words. This creature is nothing compared to the gods. Strike him down and claim this forest for chaos. But my brayherd did not move. They stood frozen, their eyes locked on Durthu, their fear palpable. And then Durthu raised one of his massive arms, a limb as thick as an ancient oak, and swung it with terrifying speed. It struck one of my warriors, splintering bone and flesh in an instant. the impact sending a shockwave through the clearing. Panic erupted. The brayherd broke formation, scattering in every direction. Their courage shattered, their loyalty to chaos forgotten in the face of such raw power. Durthu moved among them, relentless, each swing of his massive arms a deadly blow that left nothing but broken bodies in his wake. The ground shook as he advanced, his rage manifesting in every strike, every roar, each movement embodying the fury of Athel Loren. I chanted, summoning dark energy, pouring everything I had into my staff. But the magic slipped from my grasp, bending away, deflected by the ancient power that radiated from Durthu. I had called forth something beyond my understanding, and now I was powerless to stop it. The other forest lords joined the assault, Treeman emerging from the shadows, each one towering, each one filled with the same merciless wrath. They moved as one, tearing through my brayherd, their limbs smashing, crushing, their voices rumbling with the weight of ages, each sound a vow of protection for the sacred forest. My desperation mounted. This was not how it was supposed to be. The gods had promised me victory, had promised me power over this place. And yet here I was, watching everything slip from my control. My brayherd reduced to frightened prey fleeing from creatures born of the forest's deepest magic. I screamed, channeling the last of my chaos energy into a single blast, hurling it toward Durthu with everything I had left. The blast struck him square in the chest, dark energy crackling, searing through bark and vine, but the elder did not even flinch. His gaze fell upon me, those eyes like embers, filled with a fury that went beyond words. He took a step forward, and I felt my strength drain away, the last vestiges of my power slipping from my fingers. I stumbled back, my staff falling to my side, my breaths coming in short, desperate gasps. The chaos energy that had once filled me, the power I had wielded with pride, felt small, insignificant, a flicker against the inferno of Durthu's wrath. In that moment, I realized the truth. I had underestimated Athel Loren. This forest was not a mere patch of land to be conquered. It was alive, filled with spirits who would defend it with every root, every branch, every ancient protector it could call forth. And I had awoken its greatest fury, a force that would not rest until I and everything I brought with me were nothing but memories. Durthu advanced, each step resonating with the power of the forest, each movement a death sentence. My brayherd was broken, scattered, their loyalty to chaos crumbling as they ran, as they fled from the being I had unwittingly summoned. And I, Ghorlak, shaman of chaos, could do nothing but watch as Durthu, the ancient spirit of Athel Loren, bore down upon me with a power I could never hope to match. Chapter 8. The Forest Prevails. The forest echoed with the sounds of slaughter. My brayherd, the warriors I had led with promises of blood and chaos, were falling all around me, their bodies crushed beneath the unyielding strength of Athel Loren's guardians. The treemen tore through our ranks like a storm, each swing of their massive limbs scattering my warriors, as though they were nothing more than leaves on the wind. And above them all, Durthu loomed, a vengeful god of bark and root, his eyes blazing with the fury of an ancient world that had survived countless would-be conquerors and would survive me, too. The gods had promised me power. They had whispered of glory, of the honor of corrupting Athel Loren's heart. But in this moment, as I staggered back, blood dripping down my face, my staff splintered and nearly useless in my hand, those promises felt like mockery, like shadows I had been foolish enough to chase. My warriors had lost faith. They were fleeing, their savage cries turned to wails of fear as they threw down their weapons, clawing at each other in their desperation to escape the wrath that pursued them. I could see their loyalty disintegrating, their trust in my power, and the gods were dissolving with every step. They were broken, as surely as the trees that had fallen before our axes. "Stand and fight," I roared, the command tasting bitter on my tongue, my voice raw with the desperation I couldn't keep hidden. But none listened. I was no longer their leader. I was simply another broken creature fleeing the forest's relentless rage. As I stumbled through the trees, I felt the weight of failure pressing down on me, each step heavier than the last. My staff, once a symbol of the god's power, was now nothing more than splintered wood, my hands bloodied from clutching its broken remains. The chaos energy I had once commanded felt distant, as though the forest itself had swallowed it, feeding off my power, twisting it into fuel for its own vengeance. I reached the edge of a clearing, gasping for breath, glancing back to see Durthu, towering and silent, watching me with a cold, unyielding gaze. The other treemen and wood elves gathered around him, each one a testament to the strength I had failed to break, the unity I had foolishly underestimated. I had been so certain that chaos would prevail, that the god's will was unstoppable. But Athel Loren had proven me wrong. The forest was not merely strong, it was alive. It was willful, and it was beyond the reach of the corruption I had tried to bring to its heart. As I took one last look at the wood elves standing amidst the ruins of my brayherd, I felt something I had never expected: doubt. For the first time, I questioned the gods. They had promised me victory, had given me visions of triumph, had filled me with their power. Yet they had led me to this place, to this defeat, as though I were nothing more than a pawn, a piece on a board that could be sacrificed without a second thought. Had I been a fool to trust them? Was I nothing more than a vessel for their whims, a tool to be discarded once my use had ended? Durthu turned away, the wood elves following him, their faces etched with a calm, unbroken resolve. They did not mock me, did not sneer or gloat. They simply left, returning to the forest they had defended, as though my intrusion had been little more than a passing storm, a momentary blight upon their sacred ground. I stumbled through the trees, my body weakened, my spirit shattered. The survivors of my brayherd, those who had managed to claw their way free of the massacre, followed at a distance, casting fearful, resentful glances my way. I had led them to ruin, had promised them power and delivered nothing but death. They would not forgive me, and I could hardly blame them. The trees parted, revealing the border of Athel Loren, the edge of the forest that had swallowed my ambitions whole. I collapsed against a tree, my breath ragged, blood smearing my vision, the weight of failure pressing down on me with a force that felt like the gods themselves bearing witness to my disgrace. In that moment I understood the truth. The gods had not guaranteed my victory, they had tested me, had shown me the strength of Athel Loren, a strength that had proven greater than my own, greater than chaos itself. I was nothing in their eyes, a servant whose purpose had ended the moment I failed. As I crawled free of the forest, leaving behind the blood-soaked ground, the broken bodies of my warriors, the unyielding strength of Athel Loren, I felt the last vestiges of my pride drain away. I had failed. I had defied a power older and stronger than anything I had known, and I had been brought low. The gods' whispers fell silent, their presence a distant echo, as though they had turned their gaze away from me, no longer interested in a servant who had proven unworthy. And I was left with nothing but the cold, empty realization of my own insignificance. Behind me, Athel Loren stood unbroken, the wood elves returning to their hidden paths, their eyes casting a final warning to any who might dare follow in my footsteps. The forest had won. The forest had prevailed. And as I limped away, bloodied, defeated, I understood that I was nothing more than a lesson in the relentless will of Athel Loren, a forest that would never bend, never break, and never bow to the will of chaos.